For many of us, conversations with our like-minded friends and family are often dominated by provincial and federal politics. But the fact is that many of the government decisions which impact our lives are made at the local level. In addition, globalist organizations and special interest groups are working constantly to influence local council decisions. Over a year ago, Adrienne and Joseph founded the Citizens Oversight and Accountability Project, or COAP, in the Cowichan Valley of BC's Vancouver Island. They hold town hall meetings to hear from residents, and then take those ideas to the local councils. They read the many letters that councils receive from outside organizations that are efforts to influence policy, and where needed, point out to council members the ways in which those policies would be detrimental to their communities. They produce informative videos, bring in guest speakers to their town hall meetings to educate the populace, and publish a local conservative newspaper. In addition, COAP functions as a community support group, bringing together the members of the community in ways that are more reminiscent of 1950s Canada than today's social media-driven society. This interview, which is being released free in its entirety, is a guide for the rest of us on how to do what Adrienne and Joe have done, to bring effective representation to your local councils, to educate not only the people, but the elected representatives, and to unite residents into real communities. Real communities where there is true representation. Where, to quote Abraham Lincoln, there is government of the people, by the people, for the people. Joe, Adrienne, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Happy to be on.
So thanks so much for giving me your time today to give other Canadians a guide to what you guys are doing with COAP in the Cowichan Valley. You're very, very organized. And before we even get into the details of that, I'd like to know how you guys got started doing that. What led to building COAP and organizing the way you have?
Joe, you want to take it or should I? We can interject, I think.
Yeah, probably. I guess the first thing to start is pre-COAP for myself was actually just media. I did a lot of filming, a little bit of vlogging, some man on the street sort of stuff, just technology online type of things, not necessarily for anything governmental or politics, just a personal hobby. So I got involved as a technician, essentially, to begin with. I was never this side of the camera. I was always back there.
Okay. And Adrienne?
Well, I was already an activist, and I decided I had paid too much attention to provincial and federal policies and politics, and I hadn't paid really any attention to local politics. And through the years, I realized that I felt more powerless with provincial and federal, our MPs and MLAs, and then I realized that why hadn't I looked to local politics and politicians, because they are just local people. And so that's when I decided to run for council. And as Joe said, he was, he kind of volunteered to help us with some of our, hey, I'll make some flyers for you, or I'll do some videos for you. And I just said, well, or maybe you could run with me as well. So we decided to run for council. And because we were running for council, we had to spend hours and hours digging in to local policies and into their OCPs, their official community plans, and their climate action plans and their transportation plans. And they astonished us. We knew nothing about it. Most people don't sit down and read 300 pages of their local policies. So that's kind of what spurned us when we were running for council. We thought, oh my goodness, like we're not going to let this go if we don't get into council. There's no way.
So I'm assuming you did not get elected, but I'm very curious about this 300 pages that you read of the policies. What did you find in there that set off alarm bells for you?
Well, I just don't think that your local citizens understand what is in these policies, and most of them are projected until 2050. So they have step-by-step plans. And we were really shocked, and we actually made some of our flyers to show people, and we used a little bit of the shock value. None of it was untrue. It was just things that we pulled out. For instance, 40% of us will not be driving vehicles, according to them. And if anyone knows anything about the Cowichan Valley, we're very rural. We're not like in Vancouver where you can jump on a SkyTrain or something. And they have things like they won't meet their climate emissions without removing all livestock. So we pulled out these really shocking statements. And that's when we were out interviewing people, or not interviewing, but just speaking about running. And everyone that we talked to was just blown away. They're like, they can't make us do that. I said, well, it's in their plan. So, let's start. I think that's what spurred us on to saying, hey, we need to get this information out there. How do we get this out there to people? That's where I would say that we kind of made this little, pinky deal that we're just going to keep going on if we don't get into council.
Now, Joe, Adrienne had this moment of realization when she was reading that document on their policies, but you had already been out doing videos. Were you already aware of what was going on behind the scenes and sort of plans that were coming down the pipe?
Certainly not to the extent that I learned while running for council. What kind of spurred me on is I work in the technology industry, so I'm no stranger to YouTube and algorithms and spreadsheets and things like that. And I figured I would take some of those skills out into the field when when the freedom convoys were happening on Vancouver Island. I just had never seen such massive display of like a solidarity, whatever that you want to call it. I wasn't actually following it hitting locally. I don't really follow local news. I'm typically pretty busy with my own projects, so I'd say I stay a little in my own bubble. But when you see hundreds, if not thousands, of vehicles drive through your tiny little town with flags and stuff plastered all over it, you start to get interested. So one of them, I figured, I own a drone, I own multiple cameras, I have all the kind of on the street gear. I thought, what a great opportunity to go out and just film it. So I happened to go to one and filmed it for myself, not affiliated for anything, just my own passion project, more or less learning. I didn't get the opportunity to film as much as what I wanted to, so I thought this was a get my feet wet sort of scenario. I went out, witnessed it for myself, did my own footage, did my own drone shots, just from my own heart. And when I saw the media coverage for it afterwards, they had said nothing of what I had seen. And I was personally there. So that whole thing about, fake news and whatever else that you want to spin on it, I was like, wow, like that was actually right here. Like it's not across the country and it's not in another country. It's not international. Like my tiny little town has that exact same, call it system in place here. I thought I would never see that. I thought in a tiny little town in the middle of nowhere, all that stuff doesn't really happen. So when I saw it for myself, that was, I guess, proof enough for me where I just asked, like, I wonder what else, might be a little bit skewed. And then you just start reading a little bit and you learn a little bit. And luckily around here, because we are so small, it's easy to go check on things. If the media, newspaper, whatever happens to say anything, well, I can go to that business. I can go talk to that person. I can go to that street corner. Like I can actually go see if that was the case. And more often I found that it wasn't the case. And I just couldn't believe that the narrative was being flipped so strongly, again, in such my tiny little town. So that's really what kind of stepped me off, was the proof was in the pudding. I couldn't unsee it. So now I had to figure out, what else am I not being shown?
Yes, and as we'll get to later, not only is the narrative being controlled, but this is a very important interview because local councils across our country are being influenced, and we're going to get to that later. Now, right now, the COAP site says, and folks, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Cowichan Valley on Vancouver Island, it's the area on the southern end of the island, just to the north of Victoria. It is very, very rural. There's a few small towns in there. So it's very impressive that when I looked at your site this morning, you guys have now almost 2,000 members in your organization. And of course, you're going to council meetings, and there's several councils in your area in order to influence the policies that come out. And Adrian, you said something really important in one of your other presentations I was watching, where you said a lot of people have sort of, and I'm paraphrasing what you said, but some people have the idea that these counselors are sort of evil people, but they're not. They're just people who live in your area, who ran for council, and they're being influenced by all these outside forces. And so you guys have to push back and give them the truth. So please give us some details on how you're doing that in such a way that it's different than just, we've all seen videos of people who walk into a council meeting and they give their 30 or 60-second presentation or whatsoever, and it's just them. But you guys are going in as representatives of a whole coalition of people.
Yeah, and the reason that that was another thing that came out of when we were running for council. When we were looking into policies, we realized that their so-called public engagement usually consisted of possibly, putting out something online that people were supposed to engage with. But the one big thing they did is engage with what they call stakeholders. And most people across the country are quite well aware of public-private partnerships and things like that. So we looked to what our local stakeholders were, and they're very small groups, but they end up holding a lot of power because they're often engaged with around policies. And so when we were looking at the policies, we realized there wasn't a balance of stakeholder groups. There was really only one side, if you want to call that, one feeling, people that have a certain feeling, certain beliefs, certain politics behind them. And we couldn't find the balance. And that's why we said, okay, we need to be a stakeholder group. We don't need to just be individuals walking in. We need to represent. The other reason we thought that too was because all the people that we were talking to when we were running, they didn't agree with any of the policies, but there's a lot of blue collar workers here. They work very hard, 10, 12-hour days. They just want to come home, be with their family, take a day off on Saturday. They can't make it to meetings. And so who's representing them? There's no one representing the majority of the people here. There's just some very loud people from a different side that are very active, but most of them are retired. So we wanted to create that balance so that when we go in, we say that we're representing these people. They can't get off in time to make this meeting. They have to get home. They've just worked 12 hours in the mill. And so that's why we felt that was much more powerful way to go about it, is to actually become a true stakeholder in our community so that my voice is speaking on behalf of a couple thousand people as opposed to just myself.
And of course, councillors know that for every one of those couple thousand people, there's many more who feel the same way.
Yes.
So you're coming in and you're making these statements to council that have a great deal of weight behind them, and they understand that. And are you observing that when you're talking to these councils, that there's the individuals who will stand up, as I said before, and then you stand up as a representative of COAP and you're, some 2,000 stakeholders. Do you get more attention from them?
Well, I don't know. What do you think, Joe? I would say, and I think that, you could just tell them about the mayor thing. I think that we're starting to possibly rattle them a little bit, and we're never rude or disrespectful or anything else like that to them, because like I said, they are just regular people. They're not part of a party that has a party whip or anything else like that. They just wanted to run and make their community better. So I'll pass it over to Joe about what has kind of transpired lately.
Yeah, thanks. So I think what originally started with, when we spoke to council, we didn't really quite understand, say, why we were speaking, only that we knew that we should at least represent another viewpoint as to what was about to be discussed. And when we saw on the campaign trail, when we ran for council, the small groups in our town seemed to hold a lot of weight on the council, or at least the public's opinion. Like tiny groups, we're talking dozens, if maybe 100 people that all had something to rally behind. So whether or not it was like a save the mountain, save the river, save the forest, save the lake, like there was a sort of like a physical something that they were standing up for. So they're almost like advocating on behalf of something that didn't have a voice. Like obviously the river can't speak, so I'll talk on behalf of the river. So what ended up happening on the campaign trail was that voice came through so strong, but the voice of just the middle class to regular people just living their lives, that voice was entirely missing. There was no representative from that side. And when we did take the time to look into any of what we thought was related, say budgetary or taxes, that they seem to be very low on the council's priority list. So when we were on the campaign trail and we realized we needed to rally behind something, we actually thought that we should form a neighborhood association. So here in North Cowichan, we have small pockets of little communities. For example, Berkey's Corner, there's Crofton, there's Maple Bay, there's Chemainus. Even though we have like essentially North Cowichan, we typically call our area a community of communities. So we have tiny little pockets that are maybe 10 or 15 minutes drive away from one another. So Berkey's Corner, where Adriana and I happen to both live, doesn't have a neighborhood association. So we just assumed what we should do is we should go to council and speak on behalf of our neighborhood. So we will kind of stand up for where we live. And what we quickly realized was when you do anything with a society or a group, you have to have a board, you have board members, you have elections, you have AGMs, you have all these different things. And it's so easy to get booted out of your own initiative because how the other groups that are already established in town here have figured out is it only takes a few newsletters and a few meetings to get the call them like the like-minded folks to all get together and overrun your little organization. So we thought doing that wouldn't fly. So we decided we'd actually go a different route, and we took COAP as a corporation instead of going to the more community group minded. And what that allowed us to really do was steer the entire direction of our initiative without having to worry about a group or a little newsletter or something coming in and kind of swooping in. So we were able to make executive decisions for ourselves, and we hosted town halls and invited people to come and voice their questions and concerns. They could email us, they could talk to us. We met with people. We hosted 2 or 3 like physical town halls where the community could show up and just talk to us. And that's how we got people in behind of us. They heard the presentation, they heard what we did, they heard what we were doing, and they wanted to support us. So we had subscribers join to our Substack, to our website, to newsletters, and that's how we are started to communicate. And that's really how COAP kind of founded itself to speak on behalf of these members that kept joining us. And we took their stories, took their concerns and their worries. And when we went to council, we were their voice. They could go to work, they could spend time with their families, they could work their 2 or 3 jobs, like they could try to make a living, and we would take their concerns to council and present them on their behalf. And that's really how the council interaction piece came to be.
Well, and I think what you've done, and we're going to get into this story about a mayor in just a minute, but I think what you guys have done is on the one hand, it might seem like, wow, this is kind of really obvious, but on another, nobody's doing it. And what you've done is, I think you've taken us back 100 years in a good way to back when, everybody would show up at the town council meeting to express what they wanted. But as you guys have pointed out, people don't have time to do that now. They're working long hours. You're just not going to get a few hundred residents showing up at these council meetings. So what you guys have done is you've set up these town hall meetings at times that are more convenient for them when they can show up, when they bring their concerns, and you guys can then take those as their representative to the councils. I think it's an absolutely brilliant idea, despite the fact that, as soon as you say it, I go, well, that's kind of obvious, but obviously not, because I didn't think of it. And a lot of people haven't thought of it. So it's a fantastic idea. Now, Adrian tempted us with this story about a mayor. What was this?
So the story for the mayor was, as we got better at talking to council, we sort of started with the usual shotgun technique. Let's take almost everything that comes to council and we'll just present another viewpoint for it. So we actually spoke on almost everything, like even just to get used to talking to council, how to speak, the format of it. Like we almost just said, you know what, we'll just go. And even if we blunder through it a little bit, at least we're going to learn something. So for the first few months that we showed up speaking, we were representing a couple people, then a few dozen people, and then 100 people. And we got used to speaking, and we heard from enough community that we actually started to narrow in on, say, maybe like 3 to 5 very specific viewpoints that our community kept bringing up. And eventually we had gotten to the point where every meeting we found another thing that we could speak about that was closely related. And what really happened here for us locally was this climate lens had come in. Without giving too much backstory, and we'll stick to this whole mayor thing. Essentially, a few years ago, our council decided to recognize the climate emergency. And by doing so, they had invented what they call is the climate lens. And every single policy that comes through North Cowichan must be filtered through a climate lens, which means that no matter what they're speaking about, it does not matter whether it's a budget or a tax or a bylaw or anything, they have to consider the climate effect of that action. So we found that we could actually talk about the climate something to essentially every single thing that went through council. And by doing so, we really inspired our community that, yes, we were advocating for them, but a lot of members started joining us at council. So instead of just Adriana and I speaking, it was Adriana and I +1, +2, +3. And eventually we got up to actually almost 10 additional members. So they actually only allow 5 people to speak, but they commonly allow more than that if the council will vote for it. And they're actually really good at letting us speak. So it got to the point that we would dominate the meetings with so much of our viewpoint that the mayor made a point of one of the meetings doing a special mayor's address where he addressed our community who kept speaking out against the policies and essentially told us that if you don't like how the council is handling this climate lens, climate agenda, you can just go ahead and vote differently in 3 years because we're not going to change. So we were pretty blown away by that because the policy that we have in place locally is that community input is to be considered through every policy change. So whether it's some amendment or a bylaw or anything, public input is not just hearing you, it's actually mandated by our policy that you must consider the community input. And our mayor told us that we will not be considered moving forward. So again, a very crushing blow. But what it really taught us was that we had hit on something that was meaningful enough that our mayor was scared and made sure to tell us, don't bother talking about it because we're going to double down and we will go harder to protect this climate lens. And that we are still working on the right way to address that point. This is only from a few months ago. We've already talked to our local elected and the staff about whether or not that actually violates policy, and we can ignore the kind of running through that. Basically, we're at a point now where our local council has just simply admitted we would rather chase the climate lens, climate change narrative and the community input, no matter how impacted that you are by the policies that we're putting forward. Too bad. You're going to live with it for 3 more years. And if enough people dislike it, vote us out. But we will not change what we're currently on. And that is, we were very, I'm still actually, it's difficult to really understand what that means because you wouldn't expect that. You wouldn't expect to show up to your council meeting to give input. This is not a disruptive group. It's simply because you continue to do these things, are you aware of the side effects and the consequences that all these policies are creating? And the mayor told us we're just not interested in hearing what you have to say.
No, Adrian, you're not taking that lying down because I know from watching one of your other presentations that you've actually brought in guest speakers, experts on the climate change myth, and gotten some, obviously, the opportunity to show them the truth.
Do you mean in council or town halls?
Well, either one, because of course we've got the problem too that the people are being brainwashed by the stories from the media that we're destroying the climate. We have to make all these catastrophic changes that are going to have serious economic impacts. And of course, if you've spoken to any of the real experts, you know none of that narrative is true.
Yeah, well, that was a couple of the reasons for some of our town halls is that we brought in experts. One of them we zoomed in from Ireland, and the other one just happens to live here on the island. And they did amazing presentations. The problem is that we sent out invitations and reserved chairs for all of our local elected officials, and no one showed up. And so we made a record of that. And when I've spoken to council, and other people have spoken on our behalf as well, and said, you're not willing to engage in any sort of debate. And that's not very democratic. And to me, what I've done after this mayor said that, because like Joe said, we're still figuring out, like, where do you go from there? It looks like he broke a bunch of policies. How do you go forward with that? To me, now I'm just taking their policies and I'm breaking them down for them. And I'm trying to explain to them how this will impoverish the citizens, and how none of their policies have anything to do with like larger corporations or the municipality. This is all targeted at mom and pops, people like me, middle class people. And I'm trying to make them aware of what this narrow angle, like the last time I spoke to them, I said, you put out a poll and only 7% of the people that responded said that climate change was at the top of their list of worries. The very top was housing and taxes. So why are you taking 7% of the population and putting that as the number one priority? So right now, I feel like it's my job. I actually feel like some of the counselors haven't read the policies like I have, actually, because when I say things, there's often denial. And so now it's almost like I feel when I go there, I'm educating them. I'm trying to educate them. If you go forward with this plan, for instance, in 2 to 3 years, it says that we all will have to retrofit our houses. How is that possible? Then we end up with people losing their houses. I'm trying to get that through right now through policy. But I have to say that my tone has somewhat changed, not to a rude tone or anything, but just so shocked that we were told that there is no democracy and your voices don't matter. And what that speech that he said actually also represented was that there's other counselors on the council that do not agree with this. So he was also saying that their voices don't matter. And so I tried to let him know that, well, that is democracy. We need balances, we need a balance. We need two sides and then come to, the middle on that. And you've just admitted that there is not going to be that at all. So,
right.
Yeah.
But you're also keeping an eye on how the council's being influenced. And this is something that I admit I did not know until I watched one of your presentations where you talked about reading the letters that these councils receive from far and wide, attempting to influence their decisions. And yes, I think you mentioned one of them was from some sort of, I'm going to say, climate nut group that wanted to change natural gas. They didn't want it to be called a fossil fuel anymore because they thought that people didn't know what that meant, which of course is ridiculous. But clearly, these councils, there are people out there, groups that are trying to influence even these small local councils to change the policies. And so you're keeping an eye on that. And what I'm curious about is these letters. How do you find them? Do they have to post them online?
Yeah, if they're going to come into your agenda, you can just go on anywhere in Canada. You can just go on to the upcoming agenda for their next meeting, and it will have every single thing that they're going to look at. And you can see, we're going to receive a letter from so-and-so, and then you can click on that letter and you can read the whole letter. And typically what happens, because I'm in conversation with many other people around our province that are trying to do the same thing, you actually find the same letter just happens to show up at all of our councils at around the same time within the same couple weeks, usually put out by a small NGO that's attached to a very, very large global NGO, because it's just not coincidence that all of a sudden all the municipalities all over were talking about changing natural gas or removing natural gas from new builds all at the same time.
And of course, because you and Joe, as the leaders of COAP, are taking the time to read these, you can then go to your town hall meetings and you can inform your members that this is something that's been put in front of the council, so the members are aware of it.
Yes, currently what we do is we send it out. I try to break it down and send it out in a Substack. It comes out on a Friday and meetings are today on a Wednesday, usually. And so I try to read the whole thing, pick out anything that is worrisome, break that down for people, and then send it out in our Substack so that people they don't have to spend hours. They don't have to here's the couple things. If you want to come speak on it, and just send it out like that is, to me, the quickest, easiest way for us to do. Because, I mean, these meetings happen every couple weeks, right?
Right. So what we've got so far, folks, and there's more, first of all, you've formed a corporation, actually, as COAP, to represent the stakeholders, the farmers, the business owners in the area that simply don't have time to come to these town council meetings, so that you can find out what is important to them, and then you can go in as a representative for them. You're keeping an eye on what the council's doing on their decisions. You're looking into, right now, what are the rules, what are the regulations, because they seem to be violating them. And obviously, I don't want to put any kind of burden on you, but I would imagine one thought that's gone through your mind is the possibility of legal action if you find out that they actually are violating the policies. And you're also keeping an eye on the other people, outside influences that are trying to influence your councils. But you're doing even more than that. You've got a newspaper.
We do. Yes. I dragged Joe a little bit kicking and screaming into the newspaper. I worked before 2020 for like 12, 13 years. I worked for a local, really nice magazine here. And I have this, I guess, just a little bit of a romantic thing when it comes to old tangible newspapers and film. And he's, younger into the digital, which thank goodness, because he can get all of our stuff digitized. And but I think it was because, like I said earlier, how do we reach these people? So we have a YouTube for people that like that. There's a lot in our community that say, especially the older folks, I meet with them often to just one-on-one at Tim Hortons. I'll go and meet with them and they'll tell me, I don't do Facebook. I don't do really anything, but I always pick up your newspaper. So it was an attempt to get different demographics. And, as if Joe's doing, quick little 10-minute podcasts or 5 minutes, he knows that that's what captures a certain demographic. So 6 months ago, we started the newspaper. And so we are on edition 7 now. And it's evolving as we go.
And what is the circulation?
Currently, the circulation of the newspaper is we print 3,000 a month. And it hits about 150 different locations. And this is all volunteer driven when it comes to distribution. And we are on our 7th month now currently, and it's evolving and it's changing. The look is changing. I mean, we don't really come from a newspaper creation background, but it's being really, I have so many people that are now telling me, oh, I picked up your newspaper, I love it, or writing to us or writing letters to the editor. So it seems to be a good balance. We don't really have that balance like we were talking about before. We don't have that balance in media here either. No one's willing to touch on topics that we are. And it's local. Like, we're not talking about global things unless it might relate to something local, but we really try to keep it very, very local so that people can relate to the stories and what's going on.
And you did this because you knew that some of your members out there are not, obviously some of them would be older people. They're not into YouTube or anything like that that's online. So you wanted a way to reach them.
Yeah, well, a lot of them, we've even interviewed them. We've interviewed a lot of these people that have been here for a generation or a couple generations. Some of them were farmers we interviewed when they were shutting off their water. Some people I've just gone out to their houses because I wanted to know how things worked before. And as you mentioned, the old-fashioned town hall, the way it used to be, and they would tell me, we would all go and we'd speak to our mayor and we would say, this is how we should deal with the river, or this is how we should deal. And that's not happening anymore. In fact, one of the things I wrote, it was, old-fashioned values and common sense. And all of these elders in our community, they're shaking their heads. They're just like, why are they doing this? This is what we used to do. So it's really, really nice to be able to reach them and then to interact with them all the time. Often I'm going for coffee with these wonderful people and getting their stories.
Now, Joe, you're the tech guy, so we've talked about the newspaper. I know that you're on YouTube. You have a channel there. You are also on Substack. What else are you doing to put information out there and to coordinate people?
So one of our biggest agendas for the moment are to try just to let people know that they're not alone in their struggle and their viewpoint and where they're at right now. So our primary focus has been just how do we get as much exposure as possible. So we've been really doing actually everything. Our Facebook's been growing a little bit, just for, call it the morality's sake. We're not huge on Facebook. We're also trying to segue away from YouTube towards Rumble, but just to get the extra audience. We are doing what we can to utilize platforms, but for the most part, the technology end of it is just myself. So I'm trying not to stretch myself too thin either. So we primarily focused on the Substack, the website, and YouTube for the moment. We do collaborate with some other local community members who are doing like live streams, and they have their own media, and we will go out to support them and film and rebroadcast so we can get kind of like a little more insight into other local journalists who have the same or similar viewpoints as what we do. So we are expanding outside of just the COAP bubble. What's happened for the most part is we have probably 5 or 6 times more ideas than we do time to make those ideas happen. So for the most part, our excitement is very strong, but we do condition and discipline ourselves to just what we feel like we can get done and get done well. So for myself, I think I probably get done about 20% of what I'd really like to. But as we evolve and as we focus more and as we, edit more and do more things, we get a little more efficient. The newspaper used to take me 2 whole weeks, like 80 to 100 hours to put together. Now it takes me a little less than a week. Right. So as we go along, I can reallocate time. For the moment, though, we're trying to reach the general population as much as possible because we do see people struggling and we see them reaching out and they don't know where to go. And once they get connected to us, they realize how big our community is, how much support that we have, and their struggles have not been missed, that we've actually been speaking about them, perhaps even for months. They just weren't aware that we were doing it. So that is our primary focus, is to let people know what we're doing, where we are, the things that we're focused on. And if you happen to share those viewpoints, just join right in and you can keep up to date with everything. You will not find what we post anywhere else. So we are the only ones in North Cowichan actually covering these types of stories. So I think we've got a pretty niche market here. We've capitalized again on the newspaper and some online streaming. So we are becoming shared on groups that aren't just us. It's such a great feeling to see people we've never met and never interacted with sharing our videos, sharing our links, and the discussions happen under them completely separate from our main followers. So we are seeing a pretty decent growth, especially as the policies squeeze people tighter and tighter. They start looking externally and they're quickly finding us. So far, it has been a lot of trial and error, but we have really narrowed things down. Every month we get a little better.
I think you've made a very important point, Joe, in that COAP is not just an organization to influence political decision-making in your area. This is a community support group.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Joe was out there the other night at 10 o'clock at night in the freezing cold, going down and, interviewing some of the people that work with the homeless because we don't have a warming shelter here. So he went down to interview the people that are on the streets trying to help them. So, we're political based locally, but we're actually more community based. The community is what matters to us, very much so. And in order to do even more, if people want to do this, one of my favorite tools is freedom of information requests that we've done. That's really helpful, especially if you're going to go back to your community and say, hey, this is what I found. I'm not surmising. This isn't a conspiracy. I've found this, within our council. We often will write letters to council as well, and anyone can do that. And the interesting thing that people don't realize is that council actually, they will mention how many letters they get around something. Often when we're in council, they'll say, wow, we got a lot of letters about this topic. So if people feel that their one little letter isn't going to make a difference, I don't agree. I think that letters and showing up to council actually show, I think what, to me, and this is just my opinion, is before Joe and I got involved, not that there weren't people that went to council, but I think they just lived in a happy little bubble. Staff presented them with stuff, they rubber stamped it, they said, great, let's keep going, climate action. And then all of a sudden, they realized there is opposition out there, because we were all focused on provincial and federal. Most people were, especially during COVID. That's what people were focused on. And oddly, most municipalities rammed all this stuff through during COVID. It all happened in 2020, 2021, and 2022. That's when all of these policies got rammed forward in almost every municipality, when none of us were paying attention.
Now, there are other people across the country who are organizing in their local areas, but I'd have to say that I think you guys are way out in front in the way that how you organize this, how you've thought it all through, all the different initiatives you're doing. Have you given any thought to perhaps writing a guide for people in other areas? Because I know you've learned a lot too. We all do in this, as we get into this process of fighting for our rights and freedoms and organizing, and we make a lot of mistakes and we learn and we say, well, if I had to do that again, I'd certainly do it differently. So I think there'd be a great deal of value in that if you guys might consider putting together a simple guide. And I don't think it has to be like a book, a few pages of, these are the things we did, this is the way to do them. And then that would be a guide for people in other areas to simply follow that through step by step to do the same thing you've done.
In our spare time, well.
Yes. And I know, I realize what I'm asking. I really do, because I myself work ridiculous hours doing this. Yeah. But I really think if I could convince you guys to do that, certainly this interview is going to go out there and people are going to watch it. They're going to hopefully follow through and get to work on this. But if you guys could put together some kind of guide, we would certainly announce that through our newsletter. We've got 30,000 subscribers across the country. Get it out there into their hands so that they can start doing what you guys have done.
Thank you. I do think that that's a really good idea. There's a group in the UK that's done that. Now, theirs is extremely extensive, but it's fabulously done. And they've done it in PDF booklets. So is this your first time you're going to council? This is how you speak to council. So they did a really good job. And I would say that it's pretty close to us because we're crown countries. So we work very similarly. So we can probably, scalp off a little of theirs and just do a quick rundown of what we've done. And as Joe and I have spoken about before, not everything we do is going to land in your little community. If you're really, really tiny, then as he was mentioning, you might have to just literally put flyers out. Maybe your YouTube isn't going to work in a place of 5,000 people. So we can give things that we've done and just see where they land with you. And we're constantly speaking with other people across the province that are doing the same thing. And that's the wonderful part, is that we tell each other, hey, this totally didn't work for me, or this was a waste of money, we shouldn't have done this, or this really worked. So we're not completely on our own. There's wonderful people going to council all over the province. It's absolutely fabulous how it's blown up. I mean, I think Joe and I, a year ago, not that there weren't other people doing this, we just didn't know of any. And now there's thousands of people that are just taking it upon themselves now. It's a huge explosion. So it makes me so excited. Excellent.
Joe, some last thoughts from you on, Adrian's just shared that she's feeling very positive about what you guys are doing, and you're absolutely making an impact. Any thoughts from you, Joe, before we close out?
Yeah, I think the biggest takeaway I could tell to anybody out there, and it's actually the same advice for almost everything, is don't worry about doing it perfect. Just go do it. You can really perfect it as you go along. You can learn new agendas, you can learn new ways to speak, and you can learn YouTube and Substack and all of those things. But if you don't start and you don't know what you're fighting for and the community that's going to really be behind you, that makes it really difficult to get going. When we started, I did have this is the perfect way to do everything kind of mindset. And I think that was correct in terms of we should go to council, we should make videos, like the really basics. But, our very first meetings, we didn't know what we were fully talking about. We ruined our 3-minute timer. Our videos didn't get very much engagement, all of those things. But what it did do is it let people know, hey, there's another group doing something. I'll just reach out. As long as you're really approachable, you're going to get so many calls and so many emails and so many people walking up to you that eventually that whole voice of your community will speak through, and you'll actually know the 2, 3, 4, 5 things that your community cares the most about. And once you have those down, you focus on those points and you look at those things that hit council and media and newspapers, and you speak to those, which really keep your community engaged. Everyone's working together, everyone's sharing data, and you just every month try to do a little better. And eventually, we are only a year in and we're already this far forward. It doesn't take much. It takes time and dedication and just being very consistent. Things do roll in, I think, a way that's pretty natural. Just there's not that many people doing it. We need more people speaking, more people doing it, and the efficiency and collaboration and those pieces will come. You just have to trust in the process.
Yes, thank you, Joe. So folks, for those of you watching this, I would urge you to remember that if you don't do it, well, don't sit around waiting for somebody else to. Take this video, this interview as a guide, and go out there and start getting involved. And as Joe says, don't worry if you don't do it perfect. Don't worry if you make a mistake. Just start doing it. So Adrian, Joe, thank you so much for the work you're doing and for your time for this interview.
Thank you, Will, so much for having us on. Really appreciate it.
Yep. Thank you to everybody. Let's keep at it.